Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's virtual event. We'll start in a few minutes. We're just waiting for some more people to come in. In the meantime, feel free to let us know where you're from. It's a sunny day here in the Philippines, very sunny, very hot day here in the Philippines where I'm currently at. I would love to know where you are. So do let us know in the chat box. All right. So people are still coming in. But let's just get to a couple of reminders. So, hello again, everyone. Welcome to today's virtual event, Future Proof Your Business. I'm your host and moderator, Lyra V27, and I am thrilled to be here today with you guys. So, just for a quick background, today's event is brought to you by global HR platform Remote. Because we at E27, we have a strong mandate to give all entrepreneurs a winning chance to succeed. We work with companies like Remote to share with you relevant resources and tools to help build and scale your companies in Asia's tech ecosystem. Hence, this event, which highlights an engaging panel discussion later on mastering remote teams in the evolving workplace. But before we get to it, I would like to have a few reminders for everyone. If you could go to the next slide, please. Um, we would love to know who you are. So please rename yourself on Zoom with your name followed by your organization. So you can find the rename option when you click the participants button on your Zoom toolbar. Also, we'd love it if you could interact with us. So please feel free to add in your comments in the chat box. Or if you have like comments or any input to the discussion on the just add it in there. But please do keep in mind to keep your comments to the topic at hand. We will also have a Q&A portion later where you can ask our panelists your questions. So just simply drop your questions at the Q&A feature on your screen. So I think it's in the bottom part. And then we'll get to it later during the Q&A portion. Okay, so let's just have a quick look at the agenda so that everyone would know what we're going to be doing today. So the opening segment, which is what I'm doing right now. Hello. Next also is we'll kick off with an introduction by our partner, Remote, and then after which we'll get into the panel discussion and then the Q&A. All right, so I think without further ado, I'd like to invite, sorry, next slide, please. I'd like to invite Jane Lee, the head of APAC GTM at Remote, to start us off today. Jane, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thanks, Lara, and everyone for joining. A very sunny day here in Hong Kong, where I'm based. I would love to spend the next 10 minutes, not to just introduce kind of who we are, but as one of the first kind of globally remote and completely distributed workforce at Remote, give you some insights and tips that have helped us, but also helpful insights if you are needing to make a case or think about it more strategically. So we'll get through kind of a couple of slides and then we'll hand it over to the floor for hopefully a very riveting conversation. Next slide, please. For those who may not know who we are, Remote was founded in 2019 by two founders, but one of the founders, Jo van der Voort, who is essentially head of product at a company called GitLab. GitLab was one of kind of its first globally remote companies in the world. And he was trying to find product managers and he found it really difficult. And what he realized was that trying to find them in kind of hot cities like the Bay Area in San Francisco or Portugal, it was very restricted because either you were restricted by compliance rules on how to hire or didn't really know where to start. And with this kind of Remote was born. And essentially Remote really exists because, as kind of the slide says, we really believe as our mission that talent really is everywhere in the globe, in any part of the world, in any country, but opportunities typically have not been. People have needed to leave home or their home countries to be able to find the right opportunities. And what we are trying to do here at Remote is to bring these together and act as a bridge, essentially, by doing a couple of things. So firstly is through our kind of online one-stop platform, companies of any size can essentially kind of hire, pay or manage any talent, whether that's contractor workers or employees, in a compliant way globally. And with this mission where talent is everywhere and opportunities are not, we really fundamentally believe that if we give companies the ability and kind of help to be able to find the right talent in any country that they really need, we also then ensure that we're able to give employees or individuals kind of financial and personal freedom to be able to stay at their home country or cities or towns and be able to actually in return impact economically back into those communities. And really is at kind of the fundamental of our ethos and mission of why we're here. Next slide, please. And for folks who might be sitting here, maybe earlier stage startups might be thinking, well, does it really apply to me? I haven't gone global yet. And the reality is what we're seeing is virtually every company really is competing in some way, shape or form in a global economy. You may not have global operations, but you might be facing pressures to hire the best talent, competing against another startup that also may be providing similar things but has global exposure. And hiring kind of globally really does have amazing advantages, like being able to access specific talent in a country, but also kind of the know-how of that market. And we're really seeing actually very profound trends in terms of data points that we're able to gather internally, but also other kind of data sources and research and white papers that we do to be able to shed to you some interesting points there. Next slide, please. So the first thing I would love to share is kind of evolving remote work trends. Obviously, the company called Remote, but beyond that, beyond the solutions we obviously provide, we're able to work with some partners, as I mentioned, in really driving primary thought leadership in this space. If you go to the next slide, please. So we are about to publish kind of our white paper with IDC titled The Future of Hiring and Talent Management in Asia Pacific. And in this research, we went out to the market, we surveyed 600 companies across Australia, Singapore, Indonesia, Hong Kong, and South Korea, Japan, and India. And we asked companies about their hiring outlook for the next 12 months. And the respondents and kind of what is really, really kind of amplified is that over 78% of APAC companies expect more than 60% of their hires and full-time employee hires to be done fully remote, whilst 45% expect 20 to 40% to be done in contractor working. What's really interesting, I kind of spotlighted specifically Singaporean companies here, just because I think a lot of the joiners in the webinar could be Singaporean based. Also similar to kind of the APAC trend, 75% of survey Singapore companies plan to hire more than 60% of full-time remote full-time employees in the next 12 months. How does that counter to other locations? You can see also Japan at 85%, Australia 83%, and South Korea at 79%, really meaning that there is, it's not just kind of a trend, it's really, remote working or global distributed workforce is really here to stay. And it's definitely a profound kind of movement that we're seeing more and more as the years go on. If you go to the next slide, in terms of the benefits of global hiring, we also kind of just published a global workforce survey where, again, we surveyed around 4,100 global companies and HR leaders and business unit leaders into really just understanding what is kind of motivating them to do this, what are the key drivers of international hiring, HR strategies. And on the left, you can see 37% of hiring leaders said that companies' kind of flexible initiatives have resulted in higher retention and productivity for employees. So lots of people think that if you have remote working, productivity will decrease. That's definitely not the case. In the middle, you also see kind of employee engagement. People are finding that flexibility and incorporating that with their work life, really being able to do this flexibly has kind of increased their engagement overall. And then kind of, as I alluded to in the beginning, kind of retention is obviously a really big piece. It's really hard to keep great talent. Everyone's very fiercely looking for that. And turnover of talent, if you found the right person, can be costly to the organization, up to 6 to 9 months of salary to essentially find somebody else. But offering flexibility, hiring leaders, that flexibility drove higher retention rates against companies that did not. So again, there's beyond these benefits, I really recommend all of this kind of reports and research is accessible. And to be able to really understand some of the learnings that we're seeing in other companies and regions as well. If we go to the next slide, wanted to just shed one Singaporean-based customer that we're really strong partnership with, and this is a company called Table Vibe. It's a feedback platform based in Singapore that helps restaurants enhance kind of their customer engagement. And it was founded in 2020 by 2 founders, and they were essentially, as lots of companies faced at that time, COVID restrictions. They had lots of people wanting to move back to Europe. Some people just didn't want to stay in Singapore for that time, even if they were Singaporeans. And really, they pivoted very quickly into this distributed workforce model, whereby they wanted to also expand into new markets. And essentially, they partnered with us very early on to use one of our solutions called Employer of Record, which I'll go into further, but essentially allows Table Vibe to expand very quickly, not be restricted by compliance or legal restrictions on how to hire, how to pay these employees kind of compliantly. And we're able to help them also with their Singaporean entity, whereby they now just run all of their payroll with us as well. So you can see this is, again, a great story of somebody and a company that needing to pivot their strategies very quickly, of course, with COVID, but then actually have realized the benefits of flexibility and how actually it's increased retention, employee engagement as well. If we go into the next slide, as kind of remote experts, I thought it would go and sustain operations. Some of these topics will definitely be obviously part of our roundtable today. But if we go into the next slide, most of you, I'm sure, as you're thinking through, there are so many challenges that you could definitely face. And for sure, that's definitely what we face as well when we speak to customers. And you can see here, this is kind of data taken from this IDC report that we'll be publishing very soon. Kind of at the top, managing payroll and an international workforce it's kind of the biggest challenge that most APAC companies face. The law in the 13-month pay in the Philippines is not going to be the same in India. Its benefits of private healthcare much more important in India than in Australia. Like all of these things are very, very crucial to be able to attract and retain the best talent. but also just how do we actually pay people? Do we have a payroll engine, payroll partner, all of that? Again, the second and third, as you can see, kind of the bottom one is around local policies and tax. Again, you can get into a strew of issues if you don't know quite the challenges of that local market tax regulations and compliance, but also just trying to identify the right person with skill. These are obviously areas that international hiring is prominent, and we really as experts can really advise you on how best to go about this, given that we obviously speak to thousands of customers a day globally and across also in Asia Pacific. If we go to the next slide, a very quick kind of look as to how then remote can help. We really have a one-stop platform, as I kind of mentioned, where we can essentially hire, pay, and manage your global workforce. We really have kind of at the top our EOR model, which is employer of record. You have identified a great employee in Singapore. You're a Philippine-based company, but you don't need to set up a legal entity. So you kind of use our EOR solution to be able to hire that person and pay them. There's also, of course, kind of contractors and payroll for contractor workers and just employees that you do have the legal entity in. We also actually offer kind of what we call our talent solution, where we are the first kind of job board at the moment where you're able to actually post your jobs if you are looking to hire remotely. And on top of that, we're trying to manage and help you manage that workforce with kind of our HR management. If you have existing solutions that you obviously have, you can integrate your API with us. It becomes a very much, you only need to have one password and one username, not 3,000. And also the global knowledge and infrastructure in around to help you kind of advise you in the best course of action as you grow. Last but not the least, just again, we talk about the complexities of actually hiring, but then what about when you have that remote workforce and globally distributed workforce, how do you actually build and manage that? And if we go into the next slide, what we've learned is really just trying to think remote first if you have the intention just to pivot into that, or if you have a hybrid working model, really being very methodical and strategic in trying to actually adapt your processes and how you manage that culture in that. Don't try and fit your in-office culture in a remote or hybrid working setting, because it won't really work and actually could be having a deterrent. Other things that we've obviously faced that I think has been very useful is on the left, measuring performance. Again, lots of people go, well, how do you like quantify if your team is working? Fundamentally, you know, any employee and any employer relationship is based on trust. And for us, it's really based on that you are an adult, you come to us and you want to produce. So we're going to really measure on what you're actually outputting, not how much time you spend. It really doesn't matter how long or little you need. Let's just think about the bar of excellence and what you're trying to get to and the results. And I think that's been really helpful, being able to drive that kind of independence with the employees to be able to get their work done. The second is the culture documentation, easily accessible, searchable. Essentially, when you're running it in a remote team, they need to be able to self-serve a lot of these things, so being able to have that. And then lastly, flexible working hours. So again, you're not mandated. And I think certain actually teams probably do need it. In my sales teams, obviously we're working with customers and customer facing hours, but a lot of teams don't need to operate in this way, and being able to give that trust and flexibility to the employee to really design that and being able to over communicate has been really helpful. If we go to the next slide, and I know that this information will also be shared with you after, so I won't go into a huge degree of detail, but at Remote, we also really prioritize what we call asynchronous swag, meaning that we have globally distributed teams. Not everyone's in the same time zone, but that doesn't mean that the projects or the things, the initiatives that you're trying to work on should be at the detriment of that. So we really have this async work where no one needs to be online simultaneously. You obviously do need some sync meetings, but you keep that cadence quite low. You organize your tasks so that somebody, when you go offline, can pick up to really drive the next output or sprint, and then being able to over communicate to get your work done. So I think this kind of culture of asynchronous work has really helped us be able to really expand, you know, from 2019 of a very small team, we're now, you know, above 2,000 people globally at this stage. And then lastly, as a helpful tip on communication tips, at Remote, we don't use time zones in the sense of, you know, I'm in Hong Kong Standard Time, but we use kind of the universal, coordinated universal time to make sure that people feel inclusive if we do need to obviously find times to sync, and also that you don't get affected by these daylight savings timings, all of these things, because it can actually not feel very inclusive if you're based here trying to connect with US colleagues and the like. Other things that we found in terms of tooling that's been really helpful is Notion and Loom. I'm sure you may or may not use these, but Notion is kind of our single source of truth workspace. Everything that you're working on, as I mentioned, this over documentation and culture, we kind of use that to collaborate. And also Loom, which has been incredibly helpful for asynchronous communication. Again, even helpful as you're setting a sync meeting to be able to send a video of what the TLDR points are. This is what you need, so that people can do a lot of the pre-reading before, or pre-work before they actually get on the call, so that you're actually problem solving or workshopping if you did need to sync, not spending the time to info share. Okay, so I think that's it. I'm here for obviously any questions. I'll keep an eye on the chat, but hopefully get a sense that we're really at the forefront of making sure that every company kind of at this juncture thinks and knows that they can run their global team as a local one. But thanks again for the quick 10 minutes. I think I went a little bit over, and over back to you, Lyra.
Thanks, Jane. If you guys have any questions for Jane and the remote team, you may also add them in the Q&A feature, and then we'll get back to you once we get to our Q&A portion. Now, let's head to our panel discussion, right? So I think Jane's presentation has showed, right, that the way we work has undergone like significant transformation, especially in the past few years. Many organizations have quickly adopted remote work practices, and while this has been going on for maybe a decade, the pandemic lockdowns definitely accelerated that, right? So E27, for example, has been fully remote for 4 years now, so we're quite familiar with the topic at hand. If you hear like my dog yelling at me in the background, yes, that is a reality of working remotely. But while some companies are like ours that have fully embraced remote work, there are still others advocating for a complete return to office. However, if you tried hiring in the past year, remote work options have like inevitably come up in those discussions. On top of that, right, governments like Singapore, for example, are also starting to like mandate flexible work arrangements. So like all of this like really acknowledges like the growing need for adaptability in today's workplace. So what is it now? What does it now mean for businesses, right? It's not just keeping up with the changes, but also leveraging on these changes to really enhance your productivity, collaboration, and even your employee satisfaction. So today, that's what we're diving into with this wonderful group of panelists to lead us into this discussion. So I'm just going to ask our panelists to take a minute to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about what your respective companies do and what you're particularly focused on. Maybe let's start with Kihoko. A short introduction, please.
Thank you, Lila. Can everybody hear? I hope microphone is okay. Okay, thank you. Very nice to meet everyone. And thank you, Jane, for sharing about how we can adapt and adjust into a new way of working and how everybody is adjusting. Living in Singapore has been mixing and hybridizing some of the remote work with group companies, as well as having a face-to-face office work as well. And I'm really excited to hear from what other companies are trying to do here for the adjustment that they're making. From Lebanese Singapore side, the main business, I guess, that would be relevant to these audiences would be the support that we provide for the deep tech startups, mainly in Southeast Asia and then also in Japan. We are working with Enterprise Singapore to bring some more deep tech startup into Japan and also to welcome them to soft land in Singapore and go to other places within Southeast Asia and beyond. So looking forward to our discussion, and I'll pass here so that I will not go over 1 minute. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Joanne.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jane, for the wonderful introduction about what remote does. I've already picked up a lot of key learnings from that introduction alone. So I am Joanne. I head up talent access and performance at PayMongo. So PayMongo, we are a Philippine-based fintech startup. we started in the payments business, but really our vision is to enable businesses, to help businesses be a successful internet business. So our thrust is to accelerate the digital economy in emerging markets. Our vision, our thrust is to provide payment solutions, or we are developing a payment ecosystem, enabling businesses to have ease of access in their financial transactions so that they can focus on the growth and the strategy for growing their businesses. Back to you, Lyra.
Thanks, Joanne. Next, Kan.
Hi, thanks, Lara. And also thanks a lot, Jean, for the wonderful introduction on remote work. So this is Han, and I'm coming from Inspires. So for Inspires, we mainly help Singapore and US company to hire remote software engineer in Vietnam. And recently, we also just launched Hack, is an AI power online coding assessment platform that help tech company to screen their software engineer faster, more cost effectively, and more efficiently. So in our line of work, we have a lot of Singapore and US companies to build a remote team in Vietnam. So coming to this webinar, hopefully we can share a lot about our own case study about how small and medium tech companies are managing their remote team. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I lost my cursor. And then we'd also like to welcome back Jane into the panel.
Hi, hopefully I've done my introduction well enough, but my name is Jane. I'm based in Hong Kong. I'm the VP and head of APAC go-to-market. I've been with Remote for about 2.5 years with no team in APAC and have just built it since then. I live in Hong Kong with 2 daughters. So if you see them pop in, I apologize in advance.
Well, remote working, right? So, all right, let's get to it. So Jane started us off on the more macro side of things in her introduction, right? So, but what I wanted to ask each of you right now is, what do you think are the most significant trends currently shaping remote work, and specifically how they are impacting, how they will impact or are impacting your business? Maybe you could start off with Kan.
Oh, hi, thanks, Lara, for the question. So as like earlier, you mentioned about the trend that people are moving to office work again. But at the same time, I want to highlight another parallel trend that I see it happening as well for some time. Is that like there is a discrepancy between like the big tech and the small and medium tech, because like for the past few years, we have been living in the high interest rate economy. So for a lot of like small and medium tech companies, they are facing difficulty in terms of fundraising. So that's why for this company, they need to rely on remote employees in order to save cost, to tap a wider range of talents, and also like to continue to innovate in this hyper competitive new AI economy. So even like for ourselves, we also observe this trend among, for example, our US client. There's an increase in demand in terms of them needing to hire remote software engineer. So that's number one. And number two is that for ourselves, currently within our own company, we are having like 3 working arrangements. One is like fully remote, second is hybrid, and third is like fully in office. So we have like different working arrangement among different roles. And so for example, fully remote are reserved to those employees where we do not have the office location, and fully office are reserved to those roles who are required to be on site all the time. But about 80% of our employees are having a hybrid working arrangement. Yep. So this is the trend that we are seeing right now.
Okay. Is it the same for you as well, Joanne?
Yeah, quite similar in a lot of ways, but also when it comes to productivity, And the preferences particularly for the Filipino tech market, we all know that traffic is a problem. And with the pandemic having that greater push in remote work setup, it has been proven time and again that the remote setup work. Similar to Can, we actually started having a more remote setup, but because of the needs, we're actually now in a hybrid setup. So you've talked about some of the challenges in the talent landscape if you've been recruiting. It's not uncommon for you to start a conversation with a potential applicant. And one of the first questions is that, is this a work from home job? Or even if you post jobs as hybrid, that question will always pop up. So it's always a question of finding that balance between what works with what the company hopes to achieve, how much in-office, face-to-face interaction is needed, and how much energy and productivity can really be saved with a remote setup, which I know we would really dive deeper into discussions later.
Okay, great. For how about you, Kyoko? I do know that Lebanese is a bit different and traditional in some sense.
I guess traditional in some sense. Maybe we're gonna be at the endangered species of trying to continue the hybrid. I guess what we do is we are flexible in terms of if there are times that members prefer to work from home, we do allow that, and then we try to have a flexible time hours. It's just that nature of business that we do, which is basically of human to human interaction and then quite a lot of discussion face to face. We like to have members come to office as much as possible. However, because here in Singapore, and we also have office in Malaysia, Philippines, and also in Japan, and we have more of a satellite office in US and UK, we do utilize some of those group type of work to be more on remote side so that we can work together. And sometimes, yes, a synchronous way of synchronizing our thought and mind so that we can continue to work on our vision of advancing science and technology for global happiness. And we try to create businesses by solving those issues and try to monetize it so it can be sustainable. And those are the challenges that we are facing.
Jane, on your end?
Yeah, I think there's lots of movement here, like Amazon are mandating this return to office. I read somewhere today, I think on Bloomberg, that in the US, people are going into the office for like a coffee and then leaving, just to satisfy, which I think it's indicative. But beyond that, I think, again, data for me is kind of the single source of truth, and data never lies. And in this kind of global workforce report that we did this year, as I mentioned, we surveyed around 4,100 business and HR leaders, and overwhelming 98.2% of employers agree that flexibility options was what was the pinnacle point of candidates considering why they would accept that job offer against others. And then I think another data point that was really interesting after reading the report is 73.3% of companies have lost employees to other companies because they don't offer flexibility in the last 6 months. So again, it's, as kind of Kyoko mentioned, it's not, you don't have to always do remote working. This is not, it has to be the business need and the nature of what is a priority for you. But as I said, data here in this report really doesn't lie. And I think flexibility is really at the core of what employees want. And I think employers just need to be very, very proactive and aware of that. And again, I think remote is probably kind of a true story of our kind of expansion, and that remote working can work. We're about, I think, just under 3,000 people now globally. You know, we represent companies all over, but we're also our own guinea pig, so to speak, of a lot of these practices. So including kind of our solutions and kind of what we actually offer to the market as well. So obviously I'm here at the one further spectrum of it, but again, all of this data points is, I think, what everyone should go to as a first kind of pinnacle point to understand where the market is reacting to.
Okay, I think all of you talked a bit more about, the challenges that we're facing when we're going remote, as well as talent, right? And then we have like a lot of questions about that as well. So let's just jump a bit into that, right? When it comes to like building and managing your workforce. So like building on that, like what are the key factors to consider when hiring and onboarding remote employees? Because we also have a question in here that I think ties to that. That how do you attract talent that is well suited for remote work? Because you did mention, I think someone mentioned that there are types of work. I think it was Khan who mentioned that there are types of work that can be suited for remote work, and then there are some that has to be on site. But if you're talking about the talent, how like what are the key factors that you should be considering when you are hiring these talents? Maybe you could start off with Joanne.
Sure. Well, let's match it to some of the points that Kihoko and Jane said. We have to be attuned to what the market data is saying, and also we have to be sensitive to what the needs of the business are. So be it short or midterm or long-term talent planning. First, we should consider what are the needs of the business, what's the vision, mission, and the strategy, and what are the talent needs, and then where will these talents come from? And what is the talent positioning of the organization? So talents can come from both internal to the organizations or external. And then what's your talent strategy? Are you going to build talent, get talents from the university and build them? Are you going to buy experienced talent? Are you going to borrow talent using the likes of employer of record for setups that companies like Remote would provide? Or how do we bridge talents across geography? So those are some of the considerations. It's important to note what kind of skills do we need and what the talent market segment looks like for these skills. The skills requirements that we would have will differ from each of the different industries that we're from. For instance, a tech startup, a fintech startup, a technology-based talent will have very different talent requirements from, let's say, a biotech company or a pharma company. So those are some of the considerations. You would want to understand what your talent profile looks like, what the needs of your talent profile would look like, what are their demographics, and what are the mid to long-term needs that that people like them would be having, or and how do we incorporate this in our benefits planning and positioning? For instance, I can speak from my experience as for the most part, I have been dealing with talents in the technology sector for various industries, ERP, telco, fintech, but mostly in the software side of things. So maybe what tech talents do we need? Are they emerging technologies like AI, data science, cloud computing? Or are there still some of the legacy systems that's deeply embedded in the business that we will be needing for the mid to long term, such as in financial institutions, large financial institutions that still has those large dated, so to speak, legacy systems that cannot be retired. So if you look at those two samples of what tech talent you need, those would be very different demographics. Some would be like in the younger emerging generations, and some would be like more of the tenured generations who would probably be at different life stages and different life needs. So what would be the ask for these talents in terms of what would they find rewarding and attractive, be it in the benefit package, in the job setup, in the job content, and things like that.
Got it. On your side, Kan, especially since I think you also have like talents from different time zones and things like that. So what's your take on this one? Like what are the key factors that you're looking at when you're hiring?
So I feel like if you mention about remote workers, definitely, and in terms of hiring, it's not a one-time event. So for example, when we start hiring a employee, it doesn't mean that the process stops there. We still need to keep evaluating the performance of this employee over time, over 3 months, over 6 months, and over 1 year to see whether this guy really work out for us. So I feel like earlier Joanne has said a lot about how you can find the right talent given your business need. But for me, I want to add on that, this hiring process is not before we sign the contract, right? We also need to have like the process in place in order to constantly evaluate the employee performance over time and to see whether this is a right fit for us. Yeah.
Okay. I want to like continue on a bit with on your side, Can, right? Let's talk a bit about the company culture in a fully remote workplace. Because company culture, I think that's one of the things that we talk about, especially if you come from, like, if you have a company that's made up of people with different cultural backgrounds. So how do you maintain and strengthen that?
Okay, thanks for the question, Lyra. And I thought this question was touched on briefly by Jane earlier. So I'm speaking from the perspective of small and medium tech companies. So our perspective may not be representative of every company, but from our sample size, for a remote working companies, typically they have a very strong result-driven culture in which they typically adopt a higher slow and fire fast culture. Because typically there is less supervision when you are working in a fully remote working environment. So both the employees and the employers understand that result play a major role in terms of the performance review. The second point is that they're also less clear about the working hours. So although that contractually there are typically fixed working hours, but what I observe among ourselves and also our client is that the employees typically need to report sometimes earlier and also like sometimes beyond the working hours. And also like the challenges in terms of communication and to synchronize work in a synchronous environment. So that poses the challenge for remote workers and remote companies. What we observe so far is that the quiet quitting is quite common among remote working companies because that you don't see them face to face. So maybe a lot of people will check out of their work. They still report to their Zoom meeting, but their productivity, over time will decrease, right? So, and sometimes, after 6 months of working, and they just suddenly one day they tender their resignation. So we also like observe these quiet quitting quite more common than a typical company in which you have people reporting in the office and everything. And when we talk to these employees, I think the key thing that we observe is that for remote workers, they typically need to have more communication from the company itself. They need to have like clearer communication from the companies about the company achievement, financial stability, and so they need to have a very clear career plan for them. So because you don't talk to your boss and your employers all the time, they need to know exactly, what is my future in the next 6 months, 1 year, in the next 2 years. So they want to have a very clear communication and plan from the company for them.
Okay. Can you guys hear me? I'm sorry, I think I kind of lost you. All right, okay. So we're talking about like communication, right? So I want to take this like next question to Kihoko, because Lebanese does have satellite offices in various countries in different time zones, and you're a bit more hybrid, right? So you have like on-site and then you have remote. In terms of communication, right, how do you deal with this? Like different satellite offices, all of them having like different projects all going on at the same time. So do you have like any like processes or tools that you like that really helps you maximize and optimize that?
Okay, thank you for the questions. And I would like to highlight two technologies that we employ, and maybe I'll share the link on the chat as well. So if some of you would like to take a look at those two sites, you can. So one is called Oli Lab. This is actually like a small robot that will let you sync in so that you become this robot in the office. So you're not physically there, but then the colleagues feels like they are talking to you. And this robot is intentionally not made like human to allow us human to imagine your counterpart face on this, what looks like a robotic face. So they purposely made it this way so that anybody can sing to anybody, and it can be representing different person because they are different person in the office, and it's not always me or will be somebody else. So that which allows some of the gestures and then physical things in the office kind of makes it easier for communication, sometimes a little bit playful, so that you are not only talking about work, but it allows you to chat a bit so you feel a bit connected and inclusive. The other technology, Tonary, which I also shared the link for, it allows to showcase a full body picture. So instead of us just seeing half of our body today, sometimes it's difficult to see, are they really getting what I'm sharing, or are they, doing something else below the table kind of thing. But we have this Tonary, which is connected to our Japan office and Malaysia office. It's connected 24/7. It's just like an extension of a room. So when we come into the office, if you want to talk to the Malaysia members, we just need to switch it and then say hi, and then they will come to you, and then we can talk or we can have discussion. If we need to switch from Malaysia to Japan on the spot, we can do so as well. So this becomes like a portal which allows us to feel connected, although we are physically distanced. We haven't been able to install this to America yet because of the time differences. So even if we have those portals, I guess the other side will be dark, and then vice versa, it won't allow us to speak. So for that part, we use Slack, and we use Google Meet and other Zoom and things like that to let us communicate at well-timed timings. But for countries who are about 2 or 3 hours time differences, this tonally works quite well for us to feel connected.
Yeah, so it's really just really a matter of having like tools to really communicate, right? Jane, I want to ask this question on your end, right? So how can companies like provide like the tools to actually help not just themselves how to manage their workforce, but also their employees, right? Because we've talked about like the challenges, we've talked about like cultural challenges, we've talked about morale, communication, and things like that. But on your end, like how can a company like provide all of this? Any processes, tips, resources that you can share?
Yeah, I think from kind of the moment of hiring, it's not just about the tooling, but it's also about setting the right expectation of what that company culture is. So at Remote, we have a public handbook available to everyone anywhere. And anyone who's looking to apply or is interested can really understand how we operate. It gets at the proactive forefront of like our values, some of the expectations and the like. So I think even though you haven't signed your contract yet, you haven't started, just understanding what you're actually signing up for, I think particularly is important. In terms of tooling, of course, we use all these different tools, but it's really about how, again, to set expectation of using these tools. Of course, I'm sure everyone uses Slack here. Slack for us, given that we are completely distributed, and to create some degree of like osmosis of shared experiences or chats, i.e., we're not going to have the natural opportunity for me to go and grab a glass of water and meet Lyra at the water fountain and say, hey, Lyra, how was your weekend, etc. So you have to be very intentional with that. And things that we do via Slack is all our channels, unless it's confidential, of course, is public, meaning that everyone and anyone at any given point can almost kind of go into that room and understand what's going on and dip out. But also you're able to use like Slack AI to be able to summate and search whatever you need, so that you're not dependent on your job and finding that information from somebody else. The third thing is, I think, just in terms of being intentional in how you're using those tools. So of course, things like Loom or Notion, etc., are helpful. But again, you're still working with another human. So like, don't expect everyone to like magically understand what you're trying to do. Like all of the business practices are there. You just actually have to go a little bit further and be able to communicate like very clearly. If I'm going to be very direct on something to my team, like I parentheses team, like this is going to come across very direct, but know that this is like more just me needing to get this task off. It's not like me trying to be bad intention or anything like that. So I think, again, with everything, it's really about expectation setting, and we can provide in any company thousands of tools. But if you're not understanding the expectation of how to use those tools, it's never really going to work. So that's what I would think.
Great. We do have some questions here. I think it kind of ties with what you mentioned, Jane, about, you know, setting the expectations and things like that. We have a question on what are some key metrics that you would suggest tracking to ensure that remote teams remain productive. Maybe just a quick overview of like specifically for you, right? What are these key metrics?
I think it's really dependent on the role, number one, because whatever your KPI as a salesperson is never going to be the same as product. So I think that's number one. For sales, for me particularly, I kind of help and manage sales and marketing and other kind of go-to-market counterparts. Sales is pretty easy in the sense of there are key performance metrics around business that we need to hit those, and it's great. Whereas I think there's certain other teams like marketing or even solutions within sales that might not be having a direct impact on the revenue. And I think, again, it's really about making sure that whatever activity or objective that you have is trying to really quantify it. I think this is, again, this is not new things, but lots of people, when they're trying to goal set, tend to just write the thing that they're going to do, not necessarily how they're going to measure success out of it. So as much as you can quantify that success or understand, again, this bar of excellence is what's going to be the excellence bar, that is what it is. I think another thing as well on KPIs is the way that we look at it remote is we look at the what, but also the how. The what meaning this is like pure numbers, but also there is a how portion, meaning how you do the role, how do you show up with our values. And in any performance review, we look at the what and the how to make sure that, again, kind of the performance reviews or any assessment or KPI viewing is not just, again, done by numbers, because you don't want to manage purely by numbers, because that's never going to be a good outcome for any employee. So making sure that, again, setting expectations of what those two kind of buckets are, and making sure that within your teams, what that actual quantifiable success metrics would be the key thing.
Okay, got it. While we're at it, actually, I want to stay with that because you're talking about metrics, you know, and quantifying that all of that has to go somewhere. And if you're working remotely, all of that goes to a platform that's on the cloud. And when you talk about data, you have to talk about security. So let's just touch a bit on that first. Like, how do you like what are the cybersecurity measures that is crucial for protecting your remote workforce and data? Because we're seeing a lot of like issues on, you know, breaches right now.
Yeah, definitely. What's really interesting in the kind of one IBM study was that 95% of cybersecurity breaches are a result of just human error. It's not any intention, it's they just clicked on something incorrectly and they thought that it was their boss, whatever it is. And because, again, like remote workers are not physically in an office or a space together, they might find it challenging to communicate like, oh, like, is this like a phishing email? Or be able to have that natural, I guess, conversation. So for us, it's been really critical to make sure that we do very, very methodical workforce training in cybersecurity, to the point of, at times, the data team or security team would do kind of spot checks on the organization, including the executives. And we would then, as an executive team, actually look at that data, like what percentage of our workforce did pass this test. I think the latest one was like a phishing email exercise, and a couple of people didn't, even in the exec, like, you know, just being able to really bring that to the surface and actually reframe and retrain continuously. The second thing is just access. It's more, again, I'm not a cybersecurity expert in any measure, but making sure that you're very methodical on access levels, control access, again, all of our remote, kind of our laptops, MacBooks are all managed by remote. So any of our IT team could access that in any given point. But then also giving, again, the cultural piece, again, you're still working with humans, regardless of whether you're in office or not. Any cybersecurity or anything that you're trying to instill some good behaviors really comes with like this trusting of psychological safety. So if you did do something wrong by accident with no intent, malintent, then you should have steps to proactively flag this. Like, don't sit on it, because that's obviously going to be worse. So making sure that we have regular communication. And again, with our Slack channel, we definitely do have kind of compliance, cybersecurity channels that are open so that anyone globally can just ask a question. Like, I'm in my day 2, and is this like right? Like, you know, it sounds kind of silly maybe, and that person might feel a little bit uncomfortable, but those things are the most key things to be able to surface it to the organization. And then you can drive a responsible and culture of openness, making sure that every single person is upholding to that level.
Great. Now this next question, I want to go to everyone. Mainly because it's also been asked, right? You mentioned, you know, at the end of the day, no matter what tools we use, the person at the end of the screen is a person, it's a human, right? So how do we prevent work fatigue? Especially, you know, if you're working remotely, sometimes you tend to overwork. How do you prevent remote work fatigue and ensure sustained productivity, as well as how do you actually handle conflicts should conflicts arise, especially in a remote situation? Maybe we'll start with Joanne first.
Okay, no, building up on what other people said, because you're starting with me. So that was quite a layered question. So you touch on productivity, avoiding work fatigue, and then conflict management. So I think productivity and conflict management can be addressed first by establishing a strong workplace culture. Jane shared some examples earlier on. Actually, I would like to build on that in the sense that at least for PayMongo, we emphasize the value proposition of each job role, because KPIs will differ on the intent or the value for each of the job role. So when we're starting with the talent acquisition, approval of the headcount, we want to make it clear what would be the metrics, what's the end goal, what would be the intangible and numerical value for proposition for that role. And then in ensuring productivity, once you onboard that talent, it has been mentioned earlier, we're dealing with people, and in a remote setup, there is the assumption of accountability. So we establish that accountability, and at the same time, we put in place an infrastructure or a framework to support that accountability, in the sense that we have to make the onboarding successful, and that would start after identifying the talent, and there should be a lot of intentionality in the pre-boarding so that we will be able to address productivity and efficiency. So for us, we are in a very fast-paced environment. Speed to execution is very important for us, and fast delivery of results is important. So when we're onboarding a new talent, we identify what are the tools that the talent would have access with, who are the collaborators. We would like to be supportive of the onboarding in terms of immersing the new talent in who the stakeholders would be, who the close collaborators would be, what are the activities, what are the introductions. So we don't just give someone, hire someone and then, okay, good luck, be successful. But no, we are intentional, particularly where you're in a distributed workforce. You have to be intentional. During the first few weeks, set up the introduction, set up the calls, have identify the coach, the mentor, the buddy, the direct supervisor, the internal stakeholders. Because ultimately, our jobs, we curate something, our output is someone's input. And then lastly, you talk about avoiding work fatigue. So we have to establish the right goals as aligned with our definition of who we would want to be and what we want to achieve as an organization. So we at least for us in PayMongo, we always go back to our vision and mission whenever we're doing something. We have a new business update, we have a change. We would say why we're doing this, what are the market that we're playing at, how do we plan to win. Why are we doing this? And then ultimately, it's established that each individual contributes to what the organization is doing. And so the goals are established at the start of the year or at the start of the employment. The period for measuring or going back to those goals are established so that you can size the job appropriately for what you would want to accomplish. Because as Kan mentioned earlier, there's the expectation to deliver. And so sometimes we go beyond hours in the name of delivery. So we have to strike that balance. Whenever we can, we do engaging activities like we would set up time to celebrate wins, time to just evaluate our successes. We would have just recently we set up a remote board game. We did because we are like Kihoko from Livanes, we are still very much one of those organizations maintaining a hybrid setup where face-to-face interaction is important. We set up a game, a board game where people came to the office and then we did a remote version. Important also when planning our talent strategy is planning for diversity. And alongside the remote challenge or remote trends, we have to incorporate remote setup in our diversity plan. So it's not just your gender diversity, educational background diversity, but we also have to plan for such setup in our remote or in our engagement activities so that we provide opportunities for fun and we minimize work fatigue.
Okay, thanks. How about on your end, Kan? Anything to
Okay.
add?
Yes. So I thought Joanne has given a very comprehensive overview about how we can manage remote work. So just I want to add a little bit. Because that Jane earlier mentioned about in managing your remote employees, there are the what and the how. So the what is about having a clear KPI about for your employees so that they know what they will be measured on. But more importantly is about the how, as in like if something go wrong, why, how, and so that, and also if something like goes correctly, then what we did successfully. So I think it's that the regular communication that is very key in terms of especially for remote work because you don't face each other very often. So for ourselves and also like for our clients who are mostly small and medium tech, typically they set up communication on a regular basis. For example, they have like daily stand-up, they have like weekly engineering team review and quarterly town hall for everyone to ensure that everyone are on the same page. And let's say if someone is lagging behind in terms of their KPI, there should be also a regular check-in among the manager to the employees to ensure that they are not experiencing any burnout or they are facing some difficulties that no one else is aware of.
Okay. Actually, this was such an engaging discussion. The time flew by. So, maybe just to I'm going to take a little bit more of your time, guys, because I want our panelists to kind of close off, to share with us some like final thoughts, and insights of today. And one of our attendees actually asked a question that I think would be a great like closing for everyone. Like, how do you see the role of remote work evolving over the next 5 years? And like how can our audience not only adapt to it but also thrive? Maybe let's start off with Kihoko first.
Okay, let me try. Thank you for the great question. And I think, well, just as the audience is wondering, I'm also wondering what it's going to be. But I guess right now we are discussing this because it's becoming new things or new norm. I guess in the future it will be, we wouldn't be talking about it because probably it will be the foundation of anything anyway. And in order for us to thrive in it, I guess maybe you will go back to all of the panelists talked about today. I think we have to have a strong culture. And then in order for us to develop those corporate cultures, we have to have something to refer to. Jane talked about the rule book, I think. And for Lebanese, we have this 15 principle that everybody can look over to how to decide on their own to align with our company's way of doing. We try to do a half-year training to everyone so that we can realign. Because sometimes after a while, you think you know, but you forget what you are doing for. So those are the things that I can look into, and I'll finish with that. And thank you very much for this opportunity to join the panel. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Kan, on your side?
Yes. So I just want to mention two final points. So moving forward, I think a lot of companies are asking employees to come back, but I think remote work will still remain an essential part of business for two reasons. First one is that when you open to fully remote work, right? You are opening yourself to a global pool of talents, and even for our clients, when they post the same JD and they ask for on-site versus they're asking for fully remote working environment, typically they will receive up to like 5 times the number of applicants compared to, if I just want people to be on-site or hybrid, right? So that's a very important advantage that you can have even like right now in 2024 and moving to 2025. And second is that remote work also ensure that your business can continue during the adverse scenario. So for example, just last month in Vietnam, we have a very severe flooding, the Yagi storm. So at that time, we allow all our employees to work remotely so that we still can continue the business. So I feel like for all business, you need to be prepared, for the scenario in which, you must be able to let all your employees to work fully remote so that you can continue business as usual. So I just want to highlight these two important points so that, our audience today can consider further moving forward.
Thanks, Kan. Joanne, some closing thoughts on your end?
All right. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's really a wealth of knowledge and insights for the last hour. I would use 3 words to summarize my key learnings for today. It's really culture, talent, and data. We've all talked about the importance of culture. And for me, the next challenge at least for HR practitioners, is to find that sweet spot between what the talent needs and how do we build an organizational culture, who the organization is, how do we build an organizational culture that is mindful of what the talent needs would be. And with that, we always have to look back to what the data is telling us, as Jane shared at the start of the discussion. Market data, internal talent data, demographics. So we have to find a balance between those 3 things.
Great. And then Jane, as someone fully remote and keeper of remote work data, how do you see the role of remote work evolving over the next 5 years?
Well, I think it's here to stay. People are thinking with their feet, not necessarily with specific need to go into a place of work. I think what we'll start seeing more is countries and governments backing this kind of phenomenon more, and we're seeing this already. You look at the UK, they now have an Employment Relations Flexible Working Act 2023, where employees can make up to 2 statutory requests for flexible working in any 12-month period, and an employer has to come back within 2 months to be able to reply to that. Finland also has right to start and finish 3 hours early or latest around their core working hours. And actually within APAC, Australia is kind of at the forefront with the Fair Work Act, where eligible employees have the right to request flexible working if they've been at the company for more than 12 months. So I think what we'll see, and we're seeing also internally where we work with government entities as they're exploring part of this, including Singapore, where this is not something kind of a COVID thing. It's, people have spoken, and I think reality is even before COVID, everyone was kind of asking for this. It's just a question of COVID accelerated it as a situation. So again, it's not going to suit everyone's business requirement. Of course, that we're trying to do what's best for our customers and our people at any given point, but I do think the data is profound, and the quicker people get onto the train of adjusting, the better rewards and ROI you're going to get out of your people, but also your business results.
Right. Thanks. Thanks everyone. It was a short 1 hour. This conversation could have gone on, I know. But thank you to our panelists for that insightful discussion. And then well, that wraps up today's event. Once more, thank you to our event partner Remote, but most of all, thank you to our participants who are here and gave us such great questions as well. So for those that we weren't able to get into, we'll try to see if you could get you the responses after this. So thanks everyone. I think we just have some like final stuff to show on the slide. So if you'd like to learn more about Remote, you may scan the QR codes on the screen, the QR code, just one on the screen. So just find out more about what they do. And then if you want to learn more about events similar to this and keep up with activities and programs that E27 has going on, you could also visit our socials so that you could be updated. So once again, thank you to our panelists for taking the time today and for getting on this discussion with us. And thanks everyone, and we look forward to seeing you in our future events. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, thank you.